And welcome back. With NATO leaders gathering in Washington for their annual summit, President Biden is hoping to lean on his decades of foreign policy experience to reaffirm America's leadership on the world stage at a time when allies are looking for reassurance. In a forceful speech yesterday, President Biden promised new air defenses for Ukraine as it continues to defend its territory. And today, the president highlighted the progress the NATO alliance has made in recent years, including adding 2 new members. Here's some of what the president said today during the summit's first working session.
This new pledge sends an unmistakable message to the world that every NATO member is committed to doing their part to keep the alliance strong. We can and will defend every inch of NATO territory, and we'll do it together.
But looming over this NATO gathering are the U.S. elections in 4 months now, with world leaders uncertain about how long America's commitment to the alliance will last. Joining me now is retired Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and NBC News Chief International Affairs Analyst. Admiral, we appreciate you being here today. We've been talking about the level of scrutiny President Biden is under from people in his own party, but how closely are world leaders also watching President Biden this week?
You put your finger on it. There are really 2 conversations going on in NATO. One is the one you're describing. Everybody watching the president, hoping he will continue to be strong in his communications, which he has been, starting with the inaugural arrival speech he gave last night. They have a dinner tonight at the White House. Hopefully he'll continue to be on his game, but they are watching and watching closely. The second conversation that's going on is also about a president, but it's about a former president. And that conversation is, oh my gosh, what will it be like if Donald Trump returns to the presidency? Because he talks frequently about his distaste for NATO, his skepticism of it. And so those 2 conversations are going on, kind of woven together throughout this summit.
Well, to your point about those 2 conversations, the second part of the conversation, I do want to play some of what President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, had to say about the elections and what comes later on. Listen.
Biden and Trump are very different, but they are supportive democracy. And that's why I think Putin will hate both of them. But it's not my decision. I'm just sharing with you my thoughts. And I hope that if people of America will vote for President Trump, I hope that his policy with Ukraine will not change.
So we know international leaders try to stay out of domestic issues, but in this case, we know that the election is high stakes. How high are the stakes for Ukraine in this election?
Oh, they're enormous. And Donald Trump has said at any number of points that he will solve this war in one day. I can't imagine how that would happen. But what it smacks of to me is going to the Ukrainians and saying, you Ukrainians, we're going to cut off aid and go and negotiate with Putin while you still have a chance. That would be a terrible approach. It would reward Putin. It would punish the Ukrainians. I think that our friend Volodymyr Zelensky, we would say in American English, is kind of whistling past the graveyard when he says things like that, hoping it doesn't come to pass and doing all he can to have reasonable relations if Trump is reelected. But from all I can see, it would be much better for Ukraine and its cause if Joe Biden comes back to office.
Well, let me ask you 2 other things. NATO leaders have been trying to map out this, quote, irreversible path to membership in NATO for Ukraine. There doesn't appear to be any sort of a timeline for that. What message, though, does that send to Vladimir Putin? As long as Russia continues its war, is there a lack of urgency or desire to welcome Ukraine into the defense alliance?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that sends a mixed message to President Putin. Far better would be a date certain by which Ukraine would come into the alliance, say 3 years from now, with security guarantees between now and then. And as I've said to any number of people, as a former Supreme Allied Commander of the alliance, we want Ukraine in the alliance. not only because they're a democracy, but when this war is over, they will have the most capable, experienced, and blooded land forces in Europe. We want them on our team when this thing is over.
Well, given what you just mentioned, we know that Secretary Blinken announced today that Ukraine is going to be getting some F-16s, American-made F-16s by this summer. How significant is that shift in the policy from the administration? What's Ukraine going to be able to do that it couldn't do before this?
F-16 is a multi-role fighter, which is a Pentagon speak for it can do almost anything. It's a Swiss Army knife on the battlefield, meaning it can drop bombs air to ground. It can shoot down enemy fighters air to air. It can conduct electronic warfare and jam enemy systems. It has multiple roles and skills. I think it'll be an important addition to the battlefield. I don't think it'll flip the table in a moment, but it will give the Ukrainians real heft and reach and the ability to go after Russian targets. And the big decision to conclude is whether we authorize them to use those F-16s against targets inside Russia. I think we should do so.
All right, we'll be watching to see if that does happen. Admiral James Stavridis, we appreciate you today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
After